Welcome back to the Bob Fu Report, where we bring you updates from China regarding human rights, religious freedom, and rule of law. My name is Jonathan Dingler, filling in for Bob this week. Now, this episode, as many of you know, there's been what some call civil unrest in China, or protests, protesting the zero COVID restrictions that Xi Jinping, the dictator of the Chinese Communist Party, has enforced widespread across the nation. This was, as many of you know, was triggered by a fire in a high-rise apartment building in Urumqi, Xinjiang province on November 24th. This triggered protests because citizens were stuck in their homes during the fire, and firefighters could not put out the fire due to COVID-19 protocols. Now, the Chinese state media reported that 10 people died in this fire, but some of our analysts here at China Aid estimate that it was at least 40 people died in this fire. And that's just the lower end. So unfortunately, all of these people were stuck in their homes due to COVID protocols. Many of them had been in their homes for over 100 days. Some of these COVID protocols include sealing people in their homes, whether that's by welding their door shut or some other form. They're also heavily surveilled, as all of you know, in Xinjiang province. And so they were unable to leave their homes. There are harrowing videos, which we're going to show on the screen here, of just people filming the outside of the apartment building, of people screaming, asking for help. It's horrifying. So this started the trigger of many of these protests. But some of you might know the causes, but what is nobody else talking about? So first of all, this happened, as I said, in Xinjiang, which, as some of you may know, is where the Chinese Communist Party is enslaving and capturing 1 to 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps. So that is a very important factor that should not be overlooked. But Han Chinese, the majority of the ethnicity in China, and Uyghurs have a complicated history with lots of fighting back and forth over thousands of years. So why would any of the Han Chinese care about what happened to Uyghurs in the first place? So some of you may not remember as well, but Chinese students have been acting very strange over the past several months in regards to the COVID-19 protocols. Some of them have been doing on social media what's called the dog trend, because these Chinese students, quote, live like dogs. They feel like they're dogs. They're not treated as human beings. And so you'll see pictures like this on WeChat and other social medias where they're literally gathering in circles, crawling on all fours like dogs. They're keeping cardboard pets because they don't want their pets to be taken away from quarantine officials. And some of you may remember back when Shanghai was in increased lockdown back in March, that there was a viral video of a young Chinese man who was about to be taken away. His family was about to be taken away for quarantine, but he refused to go. And he said something very, very haunting, I think, in his video. He said, "I am the last generation." They were threatening that they would take away, privileges, and it's very cynical. Clearly, has mental health problems, generation living in oppression. How do they go from that to having a civil upheaval or having protests or calling for Xi Jinping to step down as general secretary? So some might speculate that the World Cup actually plays a role in this upheaval, interestingly enough. Now, say what you will about FIFA, say what you will about the World Cup, if you're a fan or not, or if you even like sports. But the CCTV broadcast the World Cup publicly in China. This is the central broadcasting for the Chinese Communist Party, for the nation. They were broadcasting the games openly. And at first, they made a mistake. They showed kind of what all of us in the States, all of us around the world would see during a normal sports broadcast. They saw, the parts where they cut out to the audience or the fans, and they're all wearing paint or they're all doing whatever. Those European soccer countries, can be a little intense. But they're wearing all of this get up and all this stuff, but none of them are wearing masks. They're all right next to each other. So you're a university student in China, and you see that. How does that make you feel? seeing all of these people acting like nothing is wrong while COVID is ransacking your country. I don't know, but CCTV ended up catching on to that, and they eventually stopped showing that part of the broadcast. They would just show the game and maybe the players on the sidelines, but that was it. They didn't do any other broadcasting of like the crowds or anybody outside the arena. So there also another factor plays into this bravery, this newfound bravery from the Chinese citizenry. Many stories about children dying due to COVID prevention. A lot of these cases are young people that are either sick with probably what some might consider a minor illness, but others that had a very serious illness that were not allowed into the emergency room because they weren't deemed an emergency, because all of the hospital beds are being taken up by COVID people, right? And so there were many stories like this, unfortunately, where many people were either unable to go get food for their children or were unable to go to the hospital. A 4-month-old baby actually died in quarantine because of this, because they were not able to produce some kind of document to leave their homes. And this was very common across China. And finally, there's another factor, which some of you are probably aware about, is there's a Foxconn iPhone Apple factory in Jingzhou City, the capital of Henan province. So there were dozens of workers, probably hundreds of them. They left, and the CCP made ex-Chinese Communist Party officials, workers, and Liberation Army veterans had to replace the workers. So all of these things are going on, and that kind of culminates into this desire for people to be free. It's not just in Beijing, it's not just in Chengdu, it's not just in Guangzhou or Xi'an, it's all over the place. And some of these protests were happening even before this one. Like before the fire in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang province, there were protests because they had been locked up for over 100 days. I'm sure they had some other things to say as well for their loved ones in the concentration camps. So, what are the effects of these protests? What's the big deal? Well, according to VOA, Voice of America, and other media outlets, authorities are seeking to contain protests with heavy social media censorship and surveillance. Some of these efforts are the COVID Health app, which is basically spyware on your phone, facial recognition cameras, in WeChat, kind of 24/7 WeChat social media monitoring. But they've also started new tactics, which are that the authorities are stopping people in subway stations, public areas, and the like to search phones of just random people on the street for banned apps like Twitter, like maybe Telegram or Signal, and they look for photos that might be criminal. What could be criminal is really just being associated with the more democracy protest that's going on because of this. There's really two groups. There's really just people that want zero COVID to end, the harsh restrictions to end, and then there's people that just want this whole thing to come crumbling down. They want, maybe not crumbling down is the right word, but they want reform. They want social reform. They want democracy. They want Xi Jinping to step down. And those people are considered subverting state power, inciting subversion of state power. So they could face some very serious prison time. This is a charge that is very similar to some of our friends like Wang Yi, who's in prison for 9 years, Elder Zhang Chunlei of Renai Reformed, which just had his secret trial and we're waiting to hear the results. But, however, despite some of these efforts from the authorities, we do have some good news that some cities like Chengdu, Beijing, and even Urumqi have eased their restrictions. They haven't gotten rid of zero COVID. That's not likely in China. It's merely that some of the restrictions like mass testing every day or needing to provide some kind of negative test to be in a public area have been loosened a little bit so that people don't outright just riot anymore. But the protests are still continuing, which should indicate something to you. Now, does this mean that all hope was lost? So they, did just giving them some easing of restrictions, does that mean that the pro-democracy movement in China is over? Probably not. This reminds me actually a lot of what Wang Yi said about dignity while he was still preaching. This was long before COVID, mind you. Please take a look.
最近我读到《纽约时报》有一篇报道，他讲得很好。他说，这个国家正在发起一场对灵魂的战争。虽然在这个国家面对的所有的问题上，这场战争的排列并不是最靠前，但是却是最重要的一场战争。因为在这场战争当中，在新疆、在西藏、在上海、在北京、在成都，这个国家的统治者都在发起这场战争，但是他们却为自己树立了一个永远不可能被关押、永远不可能被毁灭、永远不可能被降服、被制服的一个敌人，就是人的灵魂。因此，他们注定要失去这场战争，他们注定要失败。阿们。灵性的生活将在对于灵性生活和信仰的压迫当中，让越来越多的中国人正是在这样的时候来看见、来寻求、来拷问灵魂和信仰的重要性。正因为灵性的生活是人类生活的本质，正因为信仰是我们最不能够失去的、最宝贵的，甚至是我们这些罪人唯一拥有的财富。所以，当这个国家要来夺走我们的财富的时候，求主使圣灵充满我们。求主让我们不但如此，我们要用我们的受逼迫，向中国社会来传一个受逼迫的福音，让他们来拷问他们的灵魂价值几何，让他们来拷问他们这一个可怜的卑污的生活，在这样子的一个专制的金钱的统治和权力的统治之下，你的尊严到底在哪里？你的体面到底在哪里？你的自由到底在哪里？你要么在耶稣基督里，要么你根本就没有尊严。一个活在今天的中国社会却又不信耶稣的人，就是一个活着没有一丝尊严的人，就是一个活着被统治的拔光了里衣和外衣的人，是一个如此可怜的人。但是我们不可怜，我们这些可怜的人被耶稣基督的义袍所遮盖了。
Don't you see? Soil is ripe for the harvest. Situations like this, like Tiananmen Square and the protests afterwards, many came to know Christ because people are realizing that there's more to life than just their physical bodies. They realize that they have souls and the human spirit. And ultimately, when they realize that, I feel like they have a perfect opportunity to come and know Christ. So we must continue to pray for revival in China and pray that their bravery encourages us and sends a message really to the rest of the world. So our main segment today, we're going to be talking with Shi Minglei. She is the wife of the imprisoned human rights lawyer Cheng Yuang. He was sentenced to 5 years for inciting subversion of state power. She recently started a petition after finding out that Milwaukee Tool, the American tool company, used forced labor from her husband in a Chinese prison. Talk about products you don't want to buy a loved one for Christmas. Let's turn it over to that interview now. Welcome, Minglei.
Hi, Jonathan. Hi, everyone.
It's great to have you. So I just told our viewers a little bit about your husband's case, and we've been covering it quite a bit since his arrest and, of course, receiving the letters earlier this year. So first of all, I'm sure our viewers are curious to know how you've been transitioning to life in America.
I know many of you are praying for us every day. And so last year in April, we arrived at the States under the help of China Aid. And then I moved to Minnesota. So now I'm pursuing my MBA, and also I received work permit this year. So I started to work, and my daughter is in school. So everything goes well. And I really appreciate your support and help in the past 1 year.
Well, that's great, Shi Minglei. We love to hear from you and see what you're up to, and glad to know that things are going well right now. What would you say to other Chinese exiles that are living in America that may feel like they're in limbo or maybe are having a difficult time? What would you say to them?
Yeah, actually, I know exactly. It's not easy, leave your family and come to a new place, and you really need to take time to settle down. But I would like to encourage them. We need to live in the community, and we need stay with people together, and we also need just be open and try to adapt the new life here. And when you look at your kids, you really you can feel the hope because they really grow very fast. So yeah, it's not easy, but we will be fine.
It's definitely not easy. I always feel that escaping China is difficult, and the hardships in China are very difficult, but it's almost like more difficult than people imagine to live in a new country. It's like the real difficulty begins when you get to America. Would you agree with that?
Of course, I think the both things to families like us both are difficult. In China, I could imagine, my girl, her school was closed by the secret place, and then I just couldn't see any possibility in her future. And here we also we definitely have difficulties in the first year, but when you look at her, you feel the freedom, and she is the happiness, and she is living without fear. So I would say, yeah, just keep going on and trying to be adaptive. Don't be isolated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to pivot to the story about this petition. So Li Mingche is a Taiwanese activist. How did you become connected with him, and how did you find out what was going on in your husband's prison?
Yeah, till now I haven't seen my husband Cheng Yuan for more than 1,200 days. So I received notice. Cheng Yuan was secretly sentenced last July. And after that, he was transferred to the prison, and then in January this year, he was secretly transferred to Hunan Chisan prison. So that's why I pay attention to Li Mingzhe, because Li Mingzhe was also detained in Hunan Chisan prison for 5 years. And based on the media post, I learned he will be released in April this year. So before that, I started to pay attention to Li Mingzhe, and I want to talk with him after he released. So when he back to Taiwan, I finally get a chance to talk with him. I learned the situation in Hunan Chisan prison. It really made me very angry about the situation.
Yeah. Angry is just kind of scratching the surface, I feel like, just learning about what's going on there. But when did you receive, because we also know from our sources and from you as well that you received some letters from your husband. When did those?
Yeah, so in April, in May, because UN, the ex-human rights officer, Ms. Bachelet, she visited China, then I wrote open letter to her. After that, the prison, Hunan Chisan prison, allowed Cheng Yuan to write 2 letters. So I finally got some information from him directly. based on the letter, he was under forced labor. He need to work a very long time, and he also mentioned he had shoulder pain. And in Hunan Chisan prison, he was also put into solitary confinement for 3 months, and it's a torture. And so he said he lose weight a lot. Now he only has 110 pounds, very, very, very thin. And also in the letter, he mentioned his hair turned white. We Chinese people, we normally have black hair. So, yeah, so after I read this letter and also confirmed with Li Minglei, I learned more detailed information about the forced labor in Hunan Chisan prison. All the prisoners need work 13 to 15 hours every day, and the whole year they only have 4 days off. And also, they only got very little pay, like many prisoners, they only got 100 RMB each month. It's equals to 13 US dollars. And people like my husband probably they work several months and only got 100 RMB. So it's very the situation is really made me feel outrageous, angry, and also very worrying about his well-being.
Right. No, we've definitely we've seen the reports and some of the excerpts of letters as well from your husband, and it comes differently from a person like me, because I report on these things and I see them, and to me they matter and they're important. But for someone like you, who's the wife of this man, I mean, I can only imagine the emotional response to that. But what I want to focus on is you took that response and turned it into this petition. So what kind of took place? What gave you the clarity almost of mind to be able to do these things afterward?
Yeah. So my background is I used to work in business area. So my career is in global e-commerce and in the globalization. I talked to this with my MBA classmates, and everyone said, "Oh, we are shocked. It's horrible. We can't imagine that." But actually, I found even I'm their classmates, but it's still hard for them to understand the whole situation. And people easily consider it's a political issue, and
Right.
they don't understand very well. And so then after I sent several posts in my social media and also my LinkedIn, and I finally decided to start a petition. I think for all the companies, all the business in the States, people should know the real situation in China in their supply chain, and also it's not a political issue; it's a human rights issue, very widely used probably in their supply chain. So I want to raise awareness, and I also want make the Milwaukee Tool, who produce their gloves in Hunan Chisan prison, makes them accountable. And during this process, I went to Home Depot store, and I found they are selling Milwaukee Tool gloves there. And also I checked Amazon. Amazon is also selling the Milwaukee Tool gloves there. So I started to write letters to them and share my petition with them. I will write letters to several Home Depot VP and their CEO, and also Amazon different like SNAs and compliance department VP, and also their boss Jeff Bezos and their CEO Andy. So I wrote all these letters. I want them know, it's not acceptable. The U.S. company here, you're using slave labor, and people like my husband and other prisoners of conscience, they are not criminal, but they are becoming slave labor due to the evil of our Chinese government. So that's my motivation, and that's why I started the petition.
Well, I think a lot about this issue of slave labor, forced labor, for the consumer, for you and all of us Americans, is that we have to be informed about what products are painted with this very vile and evil thing. So what other brands do you know of that are utilizing this slave labor? Do you know of any?
Actually, in Hunan Chisan prison, there is another company. It's also a U.S. company, and I will release their name soon because we are still investigating other related companies. I think you are totally right. As a consumer here, if I ask, I asked several local friends and people here, and I think no one will agree they will buy the products made by slave labor. But you don't know because the rights of acknowledge is deprived by the business, by the companies, and they just are trying to hide the truth, and some of them they even probably they have more interest with the Chinese Communist Party, and that's why they just ignore the human rights violations. So I want to say, first, it's illegal. It's against the U.S. law. And second, the human rights violation is not acceptable. So I will definitely make them accountable.
Well, great. Shi Minglei, we're looking forward to seeing more reports, more investigations from you. And we would be happy to have you back on the show to talk about any new findings that you have. But for now, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone.